I thought that what would be good is to get a better handle on a lot of the ideas or events happening today. You know, that there's certain concepts which I think would be very valuable to know. And that's what I wanted to speak about. I spoke about it a long time ago, but there's certain fundamental ideas which I want to go into. And I think that provides, in many ways, a good explanation of how we can understand the events of today. There's a concept of time. There are two types of calendars. There's what's called the creation calendar and the world calendar. Two types of calendar. And based on the creation calendar, you can actually see when things basically should start happening. And that's a very important sign, indicator of what all this means, especially the current events in the 21st century. We know that the world was created in 6 days. Yes, and therefore the Gemara says these 6 days each day represents 1,000 years. The Gemara says, Shiso alfei shnin hevu alma, the world will exist for 6,000 years, because each 1,000 years of the 6,000 years really is a connected or matches or parallels the 6 days. Each day is worth 1,000 years, as it says by David HaMelech. 1,000 years in your eyes, in our eyes, is like 1 day in yours. Therefore, there are 6,000 years that the world will last, and that is the 6 days of creation. That is a very important indicator in terms of figuring out what some of the pivotal events are. Now, if we take a look at what's going on, so we have so far 5,000 years. The year 5,000 was the English year 1240. And on the creation calendar, what was it? On the creation calendar, it was Thursday night, 6 p.m. Because you have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. 6 p.m. is 5 days. That is the year 5,000, which in the English year is 1240. Now, there were many things, and now, why is that important? Because Thursday night is really Friday, beginning of Friday, and Friday is Erev Shabbos. So therefore, we know, based on that, on Erev Shabbos, what happens? You begin to prepare for Shabbos. You see? Thursday night, there are people that actually prepare Thursday night for Shabbos, because it's Erev Shabbos, which is Friday, and so on. Therefore, in the year 1240, I had mentioned a long time ago, a couple of years ago actually, and that is that on Erev Shabbos, which is the year 5000, the Zohar says that the Messianic light came down, or begins to come down, on the year 1240, which is the year 5000, right? Which is Thursday night, Erev Shabbos, which makes sense. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but fundamentally, the Messianic light, which is the Or Mashiach, manifests itself, at least now, in one of two ways, which I mentioned. One, science, which is the concept of understanding the pneumius of the Bria, the internal structure of the physical world. And in many ways, that's what the Messianic light, it enables you to understand in any given phenomena what exactly internally is going on. And therefore, I once mentioned a long time ago that Roger Bacon, who began the scientific method, where he went away from Aristotle's approach, which was basically armchair theory and so on, and he developed what's called the method of analysis called the scientific method, and that's what began really the approach to understanding what's called the internal structure of the physical world. That's on one side. On the other side, that was also the beginning of Kabbalah, because the Zohar was written, or was discovered, I should say, approximately in about 1290 and so on, which is really the Messianic light, of course, in spirituality. So really what the Zohar is describing is that is the beginning. You see? Thursday night, 6 p.m., the English year 1240, the Hebrew year 5000, Erev Shabbos. Now, we'll jump ahead, of course, to what is called 1990. Now, 1990, which is 750 years later, okay, is what's called Chatzos, 12 o'clock, Friday noon. 750 years later, so that's 5,750, which is 1990, right? And this, on the creation calendar, is 12 o'clock noon. Now that's very important, because the preparations for Erev Shabbos really begins seriously after Chatzos. That's when people really begin thinking about Shabbos. That's when women begin to prepare whatever, the cholent and so on, for Shabbos. So that means that is a very pivotal time for the beginning of redemption. 1990, which is really September 1989, because that's Rosh Hashanah of 5,750 and so on. In any case, so that's 1990, let's assume. And that is, like I said, Erev Shabbos Chatzos, which is a very pivotal time. Now, there are many things that happen, right, which are very important. One of them is that's the fall of the Berlin Wall. That's the beginning of the fall of communism. That is the rise of the internet. And the concept of the internet really is global connectivity. It enables the entire world together to be able to watch, let's say, one individual in real time in terms of a spiritual message. Very important. You see, the internet is not Yetzer Hara. The problem is that whatever comes down is always given to the Yetzer Hara first. But the concept of an internet really is the concept that all mankind, the whole world, because there are billions of people on the internet, can all tune in to one message in real time, which is very important. So not only that, but also that was the beginning of the Arab Intifada, the rise of the Muslims, the rise of Yishmael. So besides that, from 1990 on, the amount of chokhmah, science and technology that has proliferated since that year is astounding. You compare the world in 1990 to the world now in 2019, it's hardly even a comparison between the two. And that really is the hispashtus chokhmah, the enormous acceleration and proliferation of wisdom that is coming down. So all these things started about 1990. Now, we are, however, now in 1219. That's very interesting. The year 1219, of course, is 5,779. You see. So it is interesting to observe what does it look like on the creation calendar. Not the world calendar, but the creation calendar. So what you have to understand is that in the Novi it says, Li'es Erev Yihyeh Or. At the time of evening there would be light. What does that mean? That means the redemption period begins at the time of evening. It's mamish in the Novi. Very important idea. That means whatever is going to begin happening that's going to move the world toward redemption, which means the Messianic era, will start Erev, evening, that's after Chatzos, which is Beinu Arbayim. When does evening start? Not from 12, but from 12:30. Sheish v'chetzi. That's when evening really starts, you see. And because that's called Beinu Arbayim, that's when obviously at Chatzos, at noon, the sun is above at the meridian and so on. But the first time you could see it is when it can create a shadow. If you put a stick in there's no shadow, but after a half hour, all of a sudden you see a shadow beginning to move. So, Beinu Arbayim or Erev and so on, even though it starts technically at Chatzos, which is 12 o'clock, really begins at 12:30. And that begins the time of Erev and the time of Beinu Arbayim. And the Novi says that at that time, there will be light, or. That's an incredible remez, allusion to what's going to happen. When? After 1990. That's what he says. In fact, somebody who knows this could have predicted that there's going to be a massive change in the world after 1990, Chatzois, noon, which is exactly what happened. Now, if you think about it now, 2019, what's that time on the creation calendar? Interesting. So what we see now is if 1990 is 12 noon, right? 12:30 was approximately, I think, about 2008. So therefore, that would really begin, because that's already Erev. Like I said, 12:30 begins Erev, evening. You see, and approximately 2008 begins 12:30. So we can expect that something really is going to happen. Right? Did it happen? Yes. Because 2008 is the elections when Obama won. And I mentioned all in the shiurim about in terms of who Obama is and so on. So 2008 was a very pivotal year because it radically changed America in that sense. But we are now at 2019. So what's the creation, according to the creation calendar, what is that? That is approximately 12:45. You see? So we are already past 12:30 and we are really moving up. So you can already begin to see 12:45. That's interesting. That means a lot of serious stuff is going to go on. Really serious stuff. You see? So that's an important idea that you have to know, what's called a timetable of what we are seeing now. You see? Which really says to us that, as they say, you haven't seen anything yet in terms of what's about to happen. Because as time moves on, 12:45, 12:50, 1 o'clock, and so on, enormous events will happen, you see, in terms of redemption. From the concept of the Navi, that there will be light at the time of evening. Now, so that's the first thing that you should know. The second thing, which is important, is that in the time of Egypt, there's a very interesting pasuk where it says, before the Rebbeinu Shalom appeared to Moshe Rabbeinu at the sneh, the burning bush, it says something very interesting in the beginning of Shemos. It says that after all the terrible servitude, the affliction, the slavery, and so on, it says that the cries of the Jewish people went up to God. And it says, Vayeda Elokim, and God knew. What do you mean God knew? Of course he knew. He knew this before. God doesn't know anything at any time. He knows thousands, millions of years in the future, whatever that is. You see. What that means is that when we say God knew, that means a certain time period had arrived. You see. That is redemptive. It's messianic. You see. What is that period of time that's redemptive? You know. I once mentioned quite a while ago that this world can be looked at from the standpoint of the tikkun, which is the rectification. That there's Adam for before the fall, right, before the evening and so on. And then there's the 2,000 years of mankind's attempt to do the tikkun. And then there's the Jewish attempt to do the tikkun for the next 4,000 years. I also mentioned that there's a termination phase. And that phase itself has 3 sub-phases. One is the Ikras de Mashiach, where God now rearranges the entire world to bring the Mashiach. The second phase of that is called Aschalta de Geula, the beginning of redemption. You see? And we are now in that phase, basically. You see? And the third phase is of course, Yemosha Mashiach, which is the actual Messianic era. We are right now at the end of the Ikras de Mashiach. You see? The end of the Ikras Mashiach. And we are what's called the pre-Aschalta Aschalta de Gula, the beginning of redemption. And that has certain indicators or hallmarks that happen, you see. So Vayeda Elokim really in certain ways is a precursor to the Aschalta de Gula. What defines the Aschalta de Gula? You see. What defines the beginning of redemption is that whoever the Mashiach is, Mashiach ben Yosef, knows that he is the Mashiach. Like Moshe Rabbeinu, for the first 80 years of his life, I mean, maybe he suspected there's something unusual here, because he obviously was an incredibly great man, even then, with enormous potential and talents, you know. But as far as he was concerned, he's just a regular guy in that sense, you see. He didn't know that he was actually the Messianic figure for the Jews in Egypt, you see. However, what happened was, of course, is that he was informed that he's the Mashiach, he's the Messiah. And his job is to take the Jews out of what's called the Klippas, out of Egypt, right? To give them the Torah, and then to build the Beis HaMikdash, you see, and then to reveal also the Or Rishon, the Messianic light. By the way, those are the 4 tasks of the Messiah, Mashiach ben Yosef, you see. Again, one is to take them out of what's called the Klippas, out of the Tumah, to take them out of the area of the Satan, to take them out of the Golus, so to speak. The second thing is to build a Beis HaMikdash, you see. The third thing, of course, is to bring down an Or Rishon, you see. In any case, these are the objectives of what the Mashiach ben Yosef does. And then Mashiach ben David comes, and of course, then he institutes the whole concept of the Messianic era in seriousness and so on, you know. In any case, so what happened is that, so Moshe Rabbeinu was informed who he is, and that begins the Aschalta de Gula, the beginning of redemption. However, there's what's called the pre-Messianic redemption, which means that even before the Mashiach knows who he is, you see, he himself has to be removed from all the obstacles which I mentioned a long time ago that prevent him from growing in spirituality. You see, in other words, he himself has to be removed from his chains, you see. And then, once he's removed from his chains, whatever the impediments are of his spiritual growth, he has to be removed, and then he can begin to grow, you see. And that is really in many ways pre. So, Vayeda Elokim means that God knew, which means that what he's going to do is begin to remove the Mashiach himself from his impediments. And ultimately, of course, be informed. What that is called, that's called the Pekidah, the remembrance. The Ramchal in Maimar HaGula speaks extensively about this. And what he says is that the Pekidah, Kabbalistically, just to mention it, is when the Yesod enters into Malchus. In other words, when the Shefa of Yesod actually now comes down into Malchus, which is the 9th sphere into the 10th sphere. And what that does, it releases the Klippa of the Mashiach himself. It releases the impediments or the obstacles of this Messianic figure. You see. And therefore, the Pekidah and so on, yes. And that's why when Moshe Rabbeinu came to the Jews in Egypt, he used the very words which are critical. What is that? Poko Yivkoid. God surely has remembered you. In fact, Yosef HaTzadik, before he died, said that Poko Yivkoid, that God will remember you. And he obviously referred to the Pekidah, you see. So therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu used those very words, and that's what he's telling Klal Yisrael. By the way, the Pekidah, the idea that you are now going to be released, okay, has now been activated, you see. Now, the second phase of the Gula, of course, so fine, so the Mashiach ben Yosef has been removed from his impediments, from his obstacles, fine. But what about the divine presence? The Shekhinah itself is in Golus, you see. Because fundamentally there are two things in Golus, which means in captivity, which means that there are obstacles to their revelation. The first is, of course, the Jewish people, which is symbolized by the Mashiach himself in the Golus. Okay. But the second thing is the God, Kavayochel, so to speak, where the Baruch voluntarily submits to the dominion of the Satan. And he allows the Satan to take that, you see. So what that is so therefore we realize that the Baruch himself has to be released. Kavayochel, as they say, doesn't mean that God is entrapped or captured, but he himself has to now leave these impediments and we begin to reveal. That is called the Zechira. That is called the remembrance, Zocha. In fact, in Yalav V'Yoveh, what do we say? V'yipoked v'yizocher. See, that refers to the Pekida and the Zechira. You see, which is very important, you see. That means the Shechina, Kabbalistically that would mean, is that Teferes, which is the fifth Sphira, enters or joins with Yesoid and Malchus. Whatever that means Kabbalistically. And what that means is the emergence of the divine presence itself from the Klippa. That is a very important concept, you see. And that's Vayeda Lokim, that God knew, you see. I believe that we are in the era of Vayeda Lokim, as I will point out. We are now in the area where God knew, which means that we are now either in the Pekida or probably in what's called pre-Pekida. In fact, something very interesting. Next year is what? Tashrin Pei? So maybe that means Tiyesh Shnas Pekida, right? Now that would be very interesting. In any case, so we are now in a certain tekufa, as I will demonstrate, and that clearly illustrates what's going on. This isn't times which are arbitrary. This isn't, wow, we can't believe what's happening. No. We are now in many ways a parallel to Egypt, which is the Pekida or pre-Pekida, you see? And I believe that's really what you're seeing now. And that's why there are certain historical events which have never happened before. Never. And that's why they're happening now. So that's the first thing I want to mention. Okay, which is very important. The timing, the creation calendar, the world calendar, okay, the concept of Pekida, which is one remembrance, the concept of Zechira, which is a second remembrance. You see, okay? And hopefully that, of course, will be accelerated. But the interesting thing about that is very important to remember is that once the Pekida has been achieved or reached, it is unstoppable and irreversible. That means we have reached what's called the Tikkun fulfillment. Basically, it's Be'itoi, which means in its time, which means in a certain sense we have reached the end of time that cannot be reversed. It cannot be stopped, which is great news, and it cannot be reversed, which means to go back, you see. And I believe that's really in the tekufa of what's happening. When you think about that, a beautiful parallel, we know that the Jews observe Kiddush Levana, right? They look at what's called the Lunar Phenomena, right? And they, of course, do Kiddush HaChodesh, they sanctify the moon, and so on. If you think about that, what is special about the lunar phenomena? Well, think about that. The moon starts how? It lines up in an exact vertical between the sun, the moon, and the earth. So as a result of that, you don't see anything. You cannot see the moon. Now remember, the moon doesn't have its own light. It needs the light of the sun, right, that reflected off the moon to be able to see. And then the moon moves sort of like left. Okay, right? And in a certain amount of time, so therefore, that's called the moilad. When the moon exactly is in the same vertical as the earth, right, and the sun, then that's called the moilad, which is called the birth moon. That's what it's called, the birth moon. Okay, then it moves leftward, so to speak, right? And then after a certain amount of time, it's got enough mass where the sun can be reflected off it. So that's the first beginning of the phase of the moon. Okay, and that's called the Chidush Levana. Not the birth moon, right? But it's called the new moon. And from that new moon is what the rabbis, the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court of the Jewish people, they were able to view, witnesses would view it, come to the Sanhedrin, and they would declare, or they would declare exactly which day in a sequence of days is the first day of a month. That's what they would declare. That's what Kiddush HaChodesh really is. It is the process of designation. Which day in a sequence of days is the first day of the month? So in that sense, they were able to fix the month, because they fixed the first day, on which day is that. That had incredible spiritual significance, and so on, which the rabbis could do. In any case, so why do we follow this? We have the birth moon, we have the new moon, and so on. Because what the Bosham is indicating, the history of the Jews, which we parallel. The phases of the moon mirrors Jewish history. Or I should say Jewish history mirrors the phases of the moon. You see? So the first part of Jewish history is what? Is when what? Is when the Jews, right, they got out of Egypt. In other words, the Jews basically were nowhere. They disappeared. They were subjugated under the rule of Egypt, correct? And they were not even a nation that had its own identity, so to speak. It was subsumed under Egypt. Then they emerged, right? Matan Torah. Then you had the desert. You had then, of course, all the shoftim, the kings of Egypt, and the Jewish people grew, and that's the moon growing in light. You see. Eventually, however, they grew, right, until the Roman period, right? And at the Roman period, the Romans now, so they were politically independent all the years. Until Rome, whoever the guy was, I think it was Augustus and so on, he took them over. They began to be subjugated. And that was the beginning, really, many ways of the Golas. I mean, they were always subjugated, but they really began the real Golas with the Isurim, the persecutions and so on, really starts with the Roman period and so on, especially with the advent of Christianity and so on. That's the real Golas and so on, because the Jews experienced unbelievable punishment, suffering and pain, agony and anguish at the hands of the Christians and so on. But in any case, so therefore you could say that the Roman era begins, in a certain sense, the diminishment of the Jews, which parallels the diminishment of the moon. Because after the full moon, what happens to the moon? It goes down. It begins to diminish, right? Until what? Disappears. You see? So there was a rise in the moon, and now it disappears. That's exactly the history of the Jews. You see, the Jews disappear. Because when the Jews now go into Golos, they lose their ability to become spiritual, you see. And that parallels the moon. Of course, they don't really disappear, obviously. But clearly what happens to them is they now have to seek another way to do the tikkun. So in the beginning they did it with Torah mitzvahs, as I've mentioned many times. Now they do it with Yisurim, because there's not enough Torah mitzvahs to do the tikkun, the rectification process. So therefore, they begin to go into Golos, which of course is the rectification as through Golos, which is the Yisurim, or the suffering that the Jews go through. So together with mitzvahs, commandments, tshuva, repentance, and suffering, the tikkun is complete. But what happens to the Jews? It gets worse. You see, you have the Golos, then all of a sudden, here comes the 20th century. They're all assimilated, intermarriage, unaffiliated, and guess what? The Jews are disappearing. That's exactly what happens to the moon. You see, so just about what everybody said, well, it's over, right? It's over for the Jews. They're now about to terminate and exit the nations of the world. What happens to the moon? That's right, the Moilad, the birth moon, and the new moon. Hey, they're back again. You see? But this time when they're back, they are permanently back. And that's the Messianic era. So when you think about that, we keep the calendar based on the lunar event, right? Which is called, by the way, a lunation, which is a complete cycle of the moon from birth, Moilad, to birth, Moilad, and that's exactly what's happening to the moon, to the Jewish people. Because I said, because the phases of the moon mirrors the history of the Jewish people. It's an interesting idea. And actually, that's even the Ramchal says that there are a tremendous amount of secrets that you can learn about the journey of the Jews through history by understanding the phases of the moon. Very interesting. That he's alluding to the fact that therein lies there are several places that lie. Just tell you this, we could really figure out an enormous amount of Jewish history as they journey through history. One is the phases of the moon, which is what Ramchal points out. Another one is Egypt. The history of Egypt is really the Jews doing tikkun, what happened to them, where the Jews almost disappeared at the end. In Egypt, they went in, it wasn't so bad, right? They go in, and all of a sudden, right, in 210 years, they're down to the Memtesh Shari Tumah, right? They're down to the 49 levels of evil or contamination, right? And what does that mean? That for practical purposes, they're gone. If not for the fact that they still maintain the identity as a Jew, right? Which was what? They didn't change their name, their dress, and their language. So they still had the identity, but for all practical purposes, they're gone. You see, that's the same. And then all of a sudden, they emerge. They leave Egypt. You see, so that's what's called a mini structure of the moon. You see, and then they go through it, the cycles and so on. So if you study the lunar phases, or if you study Egypt, the whole transition or how the Jews went into it and came out of it, who Moshe Rabbeinu is. In fact, from Moshe Rabbeinu you can figure out who the Mashiach is. There's so much stuff that you can actually figure out, because Egypt is a model of the Jewish journey, of the entire Jewish attempt to do the tikkun. And the same concept with the lunar phases. In other words, it's not by accident that God said, well, I want you to keep a lunar calendar. No. There's some incredible, mysterious ideas involved in these two different models. Anyway, so that's a second idea. Now, a third idea which I wanted to mention is the concept of that there are 4 forms of spiritual evil. Okay? Where do they come from? Where they come from is the Torah. What does that mean? In the first pasuk it says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Fine. Then it says, V'ha'oretz, and the earth was tohu vohu. Right? Tohu means confusion, which is what Rashi says. Vohu means emptiness. Okay? V'choshech, and darkness are panei sahaim, on the face of the deep. Okay? Now, those 4 terms, tohu, vohu, choshech, and tahaim, are very important fundamental ideas, because they represent what's called the 4 spiritual forces. In other words, there's not just one spiritual force, there are already 4 different types, each one that is capable of creating an environment which is bad, you see, as we will see. What are these? So we have the biblical terms, tohu, vohu, choshech, and tahaim. Now, these 4 terms, or spiritual forces, in many ways are repeated in Yechezkel, when it says there that when he went to see the Ma'aseh Merkava, the divine chariot, you see, and before he began to see the divine chariot, he witnessed or observed, right, 4 different things. One is called Ruach Sa'ara, a stormy wind, Onan Godel, a great cloud, Eish Mislakachas, a fiery fire, and Noiga, a brilliant light. And then he began to see the Ma'aseh Merkava. What does that mean? Because what's very interesting is that a Navi, what does a Navi do, basically? He goes into a trance, although he's fully conscious, but he's in a trance, okay? And his consciousness now begins to ascend. Not him, he remains. But his consciousness begins to ascend where he's able to view all the spiritual worlds, literally, even though he's here, you see. And as such, he can then negotiate or speak to Malachim and so on. That's called, it's a Nevuah prophecy, Ruach HaKodesh and so on. But before he can go into the spiritual worlds, he's got to pass through the worlds of Tumah, the worlds of the Sultan. You realize that? Yeah. Because that's also spiritual, you see. So he's got to pass through the contaminated worlds, the worlds of evil, and those are the four expressions. Wait, those are the four expressions. The Ruach Zara, stormy wind, great cloud, dark cloud, fiery fire, and Noiga, the brightness. He passes through those spiritual worlds, and then he goes into, then he goes into what's called Asiya, the higher aspects of Asiya, which is the lowest world, then into, of course, Yetzirah, and then there's Bria, and then, of course, and then so on. And then he's able to view the presence of God from the standpoint of one of those worlds. So we see what the terms of this evil dimensions are in terms of the Torah, and also in terms of Yechezkel, and every novice apparently has to go through the same thing. Wait, or I'll lose my train of thought, and you don't want me to do that, because there's a lot of details I got to get out. Okay, so he's got to go through these worlds, right? Because apparently it's interesting that you have to see, in order to understand spirituality, right? You must understand its contrast, right? And what are the contrasts? The contrast is what? Is evil. So you have to see the different environments of evil, you see? And then you've got that, and then you could appreciate, so to speak, although it's not exactly what it is, then you can understand to a much greater extent the concept of spirituality, you see. Anyway, so that's what happened. Now, what that means also is that, if you think about it, these different forces can create different environments, which I mentioned actually in a Pesach shir. They can create different environments, which is interesting. And what are these environments? One environment is where good and evil basically are present in one place. So it's very confusing. There's good and there's bad that masquerades as good. So after a while, and not only that, there's so many alternatives to evil, you don't know what's going on. You see? So that's an environment of real confusion. Confusion in the sense of good and bad. You see? The second environment is basically where there is no good, really. There's just basically bad. But there are different levels of bad. But it is a very bad environment. The third level, and these are created by these forces. The third environment is where the bad itself has now been rationalized into an alternative system. It's called a Weltanschauung. It actually can now understand bad as a legitimate, rationalized, logical way of life. You see, it's not just bad. It's got a whole philosophy behind it. And the fourth level, right, is when this alternate system of evil that has been justified and legitimatized and so on, now pervades everything. It's now all over the place, you see. And in truth, what is interesting is that really is the concept of the four nations, you see. Egypt basically had all of this stuff in it. So when the Jews went into Egypt, they really entered these four environments, really, which was one nation. But because they failed by the Chet Egel, right, what now happened is they now have to go to different nations, four of them, that have these four environments of evil, remain righteous, and therefore they would destroy the nation. Because what they would do is, once they they remain righteous, or whatever the test was, they would suck out the nitzotzes, the sparks of Kedusha, and that nation would collapse. You see? And then you go to the next nation. And that is why, when you think about it, all the nations of antiquity are gone. Because they have all been collapsed. Because the Jews have entered them, taken out the holiness aspect of these nations, and they collapse. And you think about that, Egypt is no more, right? Babylon. So Egypt was the first that encompassed all four. But the four nations are what? Bavel, Babylon, right? Which is no more. The second nation is Persia, Porus, right? Iran. It's trying to make a comeback here, right? Which is very interesting. But anyways, Persia, Porus, right? And that's no more. That was the whole story. So Bavel was the whole story of the destruction of the temple. Porus, Persia, was of course the story of Purim. Then you have Greek. Now Greece was interesting because Greece is famous for what? For science, for philosophy. So what they try to do is create an entire system of logic, you see, to justify what's called the arrogance of man, and so on. You see, so Greece doesn't exist anymore. I mean, what's there now in Greece is a has-been. No insult, no intended insult to Greece, and so on. And of course, the last one is Rome. And what Rome did is took Greek culture, basically. It's mostly Greek culture. Didn't innovate too much of itself, and of course pervaded that throughout the entire creation. You see, so Greece started really modern civilization. Scientists credit Alexander with the real beginning, and Rome spread it throughout the entire world. You see, so those are really the four ideas: Tohu, Voyu, Choshech, and Toim, or in the concept of Yechezkel, you have those expressions and so on. You see, so we realize that there are four forces of evil. They're nations, and not only that, but they are also nations and also, of course, environment. Now, what's important to know is this: we have four of them, right? We have, we have in the biblical term, Tohu, Voyu, Choshech, and Toim, right? Now, here's the deal: Tohu, Voyu, and Choshech cannot change. Those are the forces of evil, essential evil. But the fourth force of evil is called Noiga, or brilliant light. Noiga changes, becomes good. You see, in fact, in a certain sense, there's a contest. Those three forces of evil, right? They're trying to get Noiga to side with them. And the Kedusha side is trying to get Noiga, that force of evil, to turn, to revert, and side with Kedusha. You see, Noiga is sort of like the in-between guy. So it's like a tug of war. It's really what's going on. It's a very important concept to understand. You see, so if that Noiga can convert being righteous, right, then automatically that is the tikkun of the Bria. Because then that force of evil will join with the Kedusha, and that will end basically the world itself, and the other three klippas will be destroyed. And that's what happens to them. They are destroyed. Those three forces of evil are destroyed utterly. That's what happens in the Messianic era. And Noiga converts into good, and as a result of that, it is now part of the Kedusha, and so on. Now these are very important ideas to understand, because the payoff of this is you're going to understand what's happening today. You see. But before I get in today, I want to mention this. There's a very important phenomenon in Judaism. What is that? That's called the mateh, the staff that Moshe Rabbeinu used to perform the miracles. That staff is not just a piece of wood, you see. Now, the story goes, of course, is that Moshe Rabbeinu, God spoke to him at the sneh, which of course is the burning bush, speaks to him. He says, okay, I want you to you have a staff in your hand, right? All of a sudden, throw it down. And it becomes a snake. The same staff, which represents the holiness of God, you see, because that's with what he did the miracles with, also is really the snake, the Satan. The very same item, very important idea, we have to explain it. The very same item called the mateh really is the mateh and the nochosh at the same time. Same time, you see, which is a very, like I say, a critical idea. Okay. The question is why? And then, of course, God said, pick up the snake, and it turned back into a mateh. I mean, there God was saying, don't worry about Egypt, in other words, Egypt took all the, what's called the Nitzotze Kedusha. They took all the sparks of holiness, and that's why they're so powerful. But after the Jews did the tikkun, whatever, it's gone. And therefore pick up therefore the snake has no more power, because it survives because of the holiness of the mater. Same item. Pick it up, turn back into a mater. You see. Now that's a very important, in certain ways, secret almost. Why would good and bad, holiness and evil exist in the same item? It's not like there's one item here, which is holiness, right? And there's another item here which represents evil. No. There's one item that has both in it. The question is, what's its form? Is it the form of good, which is holiness, or is it the form of evil, which is the nachash, the snake, which obviously represents the Satan? Which is it? The question is, why is that? What's the secret of the fact that good and evil, holiness and evil, right? Contamination, whatever, is represented by the same item. This is the question. That's a very important idea. What does that mean? It means this, okay? There's a concept of a continuum. It's not that there's good and there's evil. Good and evil, which ultimately lead to holiness and contamination, right? Pollution, whatever, is really one stick. It's one concept. The question is, where are you on this concept? Where are you on the continuum? What's the continuum? The continuum, of course, is this: existence. What really exists? What's your belief? So, on one end of the continuum, which is the extreme right, is the concept of Einod Milvadoi. The only one that exists is God. Right? Therefore, that's one end of the stick, continuum. On the other end of the stick is what? Yeshai Milvadoi, which is really almost the middle, that besides God, there's me. In other words, I share existence with Him. And at the far end of the stick is Einod Milvadi. I'm the only guy that exists. But notice it's one continuum. And the question is, where are you on that continuum? Do you believe Einod Milvadoi? That's one end of this continuum. That's why a stick is really a continuum, right? In that sense. Einod Milvadi, besides God, there is nothing else. Existence has only one being, basically. And we emerge from that being. Or, the middle of it is like, wait. I admit that God exists also, but Yeshod Milvadoi, He and I share existence. You see? And then at the extreme end is Einod Milvadi. Besides me, there is nothing else. I'm the only guy. You see? Therefore, we understand now the concept of a nochosh. What does a snake want to do? What is evil? What evil wants to convince you is that you are the king. Ultimately, you are. Everything revolves around you. Therefore, you can do whatever you want. Any act you want to do is okay because you are the man. You see? That's ultimately what the Satan wants to do. Of course, once you believe that, then you're going to do evil. See, so evil or the acts of evil are merely repercussions or consequences of what you believe yourself to be and what exists in the real world, in reality. You see, therefore, the stick is really both. Because the stick represents what is your belief of existence. Who is? You see? So if it's a mater, God is. And if it's a nochosh, you are. You see? But it's really the same continuum. You know, it's a very important concept what I'm telling you. I cannot emphasize. That's why the nochosh, the snake, and the mater, the staff of God, is one item. It's not two different items. So very important. So in many ways, it's a profound understanding of what evil is and what it wants to do to you. It wants to convince that you are independent, not only independent, in its worst form, you are the only thing that exists.
Isn't that the struggle of Adamari show?
Yes, well, yes, and I'm going to show you now how that really is so important to understand. You understand, that's why, the Mateh and the Nochash are really one item. You see, because that's really what evil and good is. It's where are you on the continuum? The acts of evil or the acts of good are generated by your belief, that's all, but they are consequences. It is the belief that's fundamental. Got that? Now, let's take a look. It's interesting. I once shared this a long time ago. Those people who believe that they are it, they're called megalomaniacs. A megalomaniac believes that he is God, that I am. Of course they're not stupid, they see other people, but basically everybody else is a cockroach. You see, it's almost like, what's your idea of a flea? It's nothing, even though we know it has existence, but basically, right, it's a non-being, you see. Okay? That's a megalomaniac. A real megalomaniac, and there were many examples in history, there's Caligula from Rome, there is all these crazy dictators.
Hitler was a megalomaniac?
Yes, he was a megalomaniac, so was Stalin, what's his name, Mao Zedong. They're all megalomaniacs. What? Paro, yeah, Paro certainly thought he was a god. Yeah, whatever. Anyway, these are megalomaniacs. Then that's the first level, and that's at the other end of the stick. You see? Then the next is not a megalomaniac, it's called egocentric, or rather an egomaniac. What's an egomaniac? Right? What is he? No, he's not megalomaniac, means he doesn't believe that you're worms or you're cockroaches or whatever, right? What he believes is that, of course you're real people, but you all exist to serve me. You see, you have no importance other than serving me. That's an egocentric or an egomaniac. So he's a little more healthy. He's a little more healthy than the megalomaniac. You see? But he's pretty bad off. You got it? So that's moving toward the, more toward the right. Right? Then you got the guy who is called, an egoist. Who's an egoist? And of course you all exist, and you don't exist to serve me, but I want to tell you something. I'm much better than you guys. I'm much superior to you. You see? You guys don't hold a candle to me and my intellect. Right? That's what this guy egoist says, right? It's the concept of arrogance, which is really the concept of superiority. So he's not crazy like the megalomaniac, where you don't exist at all, basically. And he's not egocentric or egomaniac, where you all exist to serve me. No. You all exist, you serve yourselves and so on, but you can't compare to me. Forget about it. You see? So he's not as sick as the other two people, but he's, pretty bad. And many people that you encounter today are egoists. They think they're God's gift to the planet. You see? Almost. Then the fourth level, now these three levels is the power of the three levels of evil. You see? Because remember, the whole concept of evil is to deny Einay Mavadoi. And therefore the question is, where are they on the continuum? Where is evil on the continuum? That's the question. See? Then there's the fourth level, which is the gentlest level, although it is also, right? And that's called concept of Yeshoid Mavadoi. I'm not superior to anybody. We're all equal, you see? But we all exist. You see, God exists, we exist, and we are all equal. Most people, that's called self-complacency. You see, where a guy thinks that, I can do whatever I want. I have my own will because I'm an independent being, you see. And therefore, we're all equal in that sense, but Yeshoid Mavadoi, so besides God, there's also me. You see, they believe to a certain extent that they have a valid, independent existence of God, but they're willing to share it with God in that sense. And these people, therefore, do whatever they want. You see, then you begin to move to the other end. That's like the middle. And the other end, of course, is Einay Mavadoi. You see? which is very interesting. So that's really the continuum. That's why the mater, you see, which is very important, is really evil and good, or holiness and contamination, exist in the exact same item, because it's basically a continuum. The belief is a continuum of that item. Very important idea, you see. Now, I mentioned, where does man fit? So man is in the middle, you see, and he's being swayed toward Kedusha, or he's being swayed toward evil. So in that sense, the force of Noiga, which I said can go either way, really is that force where man is thrust into. Because a man can go either way. He can go toward the side of good, holiness, where he says Einod Mavada, right? And then he joins together with Kedusha, holiness. Or he can go to the side of evil, where he joins, all these delusions of grandiosity and so on, where he joins with the side of evil. See, so man basically is Noiga in the middle. And that's why by Moshe Rabbeinu there were three components. What were they? There was Moshe, right? He's Noiga in a certain sense, not he's Noiga, but that he represents a person who can be swayed either way, which represents all mankind. Now, of course, Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, wasn't swayed at all. Of course, he's one of the greatest Jews that ever lived, and so on, and so on, right? And he's holding a mater, which is either holiness or. So you have three components here. You see, so the fundamental fabric of the Bria is three different entities. Entity one is God, entity two is Tumah, and entity three is man. Which way does he go? You see? That's why Moshe holding the mater, becoming a snake, and then taking it back, is an exact metaphor of the entire structure of creation. It's a very important concept to understand what that metaphor is, or rather, what that item is, the concept of a mater, a staff, the concept of that staff being able to turn into a snake, the Satan, and the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu is holding it, you see. Very important idea. Now, once we understand that, you see, we can now understand a very important aspect of current events. Now that we understand these important ideas, what the fabric is, or what the fundamental nature of what Jews have to do, and so on, Mat and the Nochash, the different spiritual forces and so on. In a certain sense, we now can have a handle on what's going on. In a certain way, as I mentioned, the Pekida, the pre-Pekida, has begun. You see, what does that mean? That means, like I said, there are four spiritual forces that are bad, but one of them, called Noiga, reverts and converts to become good. Okay? It's interesting. Okay? Now, each one of these forces represents a nation. You see, the last nation, or the last, it's called Klippa, right, which is the worst, and so on, right, is the extension or the expansion of the evil across the world. And that's Esav. You see, Esav is the worst. But we know Esav is really who? He's Edom, the Edomites. Who is Edom? Edom is Rome, right? Who is Rome, right? The form of Rome is Christianity. You see, the bad part of Christianity, right? And who is Christianity today? Is basically Western civilization. Okay. So therefore, what is interesting is that they themselves have these different forms. It's not only are there four different spiritual forces, but each spiritual force itself has four within it, so to speak. Because in Judaism, everything is subdivided in the same exact things, spheres, and so on, and like for instance, the neshama. There are five aspects of the neshama, right? There's going from, well, we go either way. You go from bottom to top to bottom. Let's say you have what? You have nefesh, then you have ruach, I'm not going up to the holiest, right? Then you have, of course, neshama, chaya, and yechida, and you can reverse, right? But the nefesh itself has these five. Is the what do you call it? The nefesh of the nefesh, the ruach of the nefesh, you see, the neshama of the nefesh, the Chai of the Nefesh, and the Yechid of the Nefesh. You see, so each one has the same four repeated on, and the same is true of spheres, which I once mentioned quite a while ago, and so on. Okay, the same thing as evil, because whatever's in Kedusha is also in evil, where you have these four also. So therefore, it comes out, right, that in the worst klipa, in the worst force of evil, and so on, right, which is basically Rome and so on, right, and you have these four repeated. You see, we can now begin to understand something in terms of what's happening today, okay? In America, right, the force of, there are four forces going on, which is interesting, you know. One is, let's look at it this way, Noiga, which I said is going to convert. The force of Noiga, right, is converting. That's Trump. You see, Trump is America doing tshuva. That's the concept of Tov Sheba Esav. You see, Tov Sheba Esav means the good part of Esav. It means, and I mentioned so many different times before, Esav does tshuva. Who is that? Donald Trump. He is Esav doing tshuva, and what he's doing is incredible. What the man is doing with Israel and so on, even with America, is historical. You see, so in a certain sense, Trump represents the force of Noiga, right, in the good side, where Noiga has now done tshuva. The other three, with an Esav, is evil. Who are they? Well, who would I identify them with, right? Who's the worst part? The Democrats, right? They're the worst. The next one after the Democrats are the media. That you don't realize how evil the media is. It's beyond belief. But it's the Democrats and the media, because the Democrats is the exactly is the what's called is the guy who's come up with all the theory and the judgment and all that, right? And the media is the communications aspect of the Democrats. Who's the third? The third are basically, and not as bad as the Democrats and the media. They are the never Trumpers Republicans. Yeah, same. This is also very bad. They are also opposing Trump, right? Except the Republicans. So in a certain sense, they're similar. They got commonalities here, you see. But they're all bad because they're all defying Trump. And the force of Trump is really Noiga in that sense, you see. So it's remarkable when you think about that all of these four different components of what's going on in America, and that's really what it is nothing more than the beginning of the end of these four. Three, I think, will be destroyed. And if Trump wins by a landslide in 2020, I think you may watch the beginning of the unraveling of the Democratic Party. Certainly the media and everybody else. I think the Moshe may put an end to all these guys because they are incredibly evil. What they have done, they have demoralized America, right? They have introduced unbelievable, amoral legislation, homosexuality. There's so much bad stuff in America. Abortion. I can't go. I'm not going to go through the list. But you cannot believe what the Democrats have done to this country. But what they have done is more than that. The evil that they're displaying now, these three. First of all, they have accused Trump of something that they knowingly knew was based on a false document. You have any idea what kind of evil that is? They knew the FISA code, what's his name's document is false, yet they didn't care. So they created a hoax to destroy a president. First evil. Second evil, even after Mueller said it was a hoax, they're still trying to destroy the guy. It's beyond belief. You know what kind of evil mind it takes to do that? And the third evil, is that in many ways they have defied the Constitution. Remember, the United States exists on the Constitution. That's what keeps us from destroying one another, as it says in Pirkei Avos, you know. If not, yeah, exactly. If not for the fear of the kingdom, right? They would swallow each other whole alive. I mean, that's a statement of the nature of man, you see. So when you attack the Constitution, or when you defy it, and in many ways, combat the Constitution, That's an incredible evil because that's what the country is based on. That's what gives the government the right to the authority and so on and keeps stability in this country. See, that's the third evil. You know what the fourth evil is? Because, and by the way, to do that, to go against the Constitution, because Trump is a constitutionally elected president, that's called treason. Really, they're guilty of treason. It's really what it is. That's the nature of the crime, as far as I'm concerned. It's okay? But the fourth evil is, in many ways, terrible. You know what that is? That by doing this to Trump, the American people have suffered terribly. That means there's no real legislation going on. Right? I mean, what's the idea of a president? To legislate, right, or rather executive branch, is to try to introduce bills and all that through the Congress and all that, you know, to get America moving, to improve America, to enhance. And what are they doing? He can't do anything. Not only are they stopping him in terms of the Congress, you know, but he can't push through any legislation. He's got to do everything on his own. You have any idea of what kind of tragedy and treachery that is to the American people? They are the worst victims of all, not just Trump. You see, those are the evils of these three parties. You see? So, by understanding the nature of evil, what it can do, we actually can see that in Esav himself, that is the worst form of evil, these four sub-levels exist. And we can see how three of them are evil, literally, right? And we can see how one is actually good. You know, it's the tshuva of Esav, which is supposed to now help the Jewish people. That's what's happening. You see, now that's a very important idea, just to give a context or a framework to what? To, you know, it's our pi hashkafa. You see, to understand what this means in terms of what's going on today in terms of hashkafa. Anyway, so now, that's the first thing. To show you we are pre-Messianic, which is pre-Pekido, you know, there are three things happening now that never happened before. It's historical. What are they? One, Trump. The concept of Trump, a man that's turning over America literally, right? And the concept of, so he himself is historical. Nobody ever saw a guy like this. They can't predict him. They can't stop him. You see? And they hate him. You see? That's historical. Part of that historical idea is the opposition. You see? The opposition never happened before. Nobody ever did this to any president of the United States. I mean, there are people who disagree with the president, fine. But you don't spend the whole 4 years trying to throw him out. Impeachment. It's incredible what's going on. You got crazy. And this is after he's been exonerated by Mueller. It's insane. We are looking at something that has no precedent in American history. Why? Because we are looking at Geula, redemption. And I told you, at the end of time, it's like the end of Egypt, where God says to the Jews, and the Egyptians are about to attack the Jews, right, at Kriyas Yamsuf, the Red Sea, right? Hisyatsu uru'u, watch what I will do. You see, you guys don't say anything. You guys already did your tikkun. I'm going to take over now. You see, and that's exactly what God did. And God says, right? You know, Hisyatsu, watch, right? Hashem yilochem lochem. God is going to fight for you, and He wiped out Egypt. You see, that's what happens in the end. You see, in the end, evil must be wiped out. You see, very important idea. But there's something that has to precede the wipeout. And that is, they have to acknowledge that they were wrong. There's two concepts of the termination of evil. Evil have to say, you know, you are right and I am wrong. That's why Yaakov Avinu fought with the Malach. The Malach had to say to him, the angel which he fought, had to say to him, hey, you know, you're right, and I was wrong. And he blessed him with the name Yisrael.
Why is that necessary?
Because then you would always think, well, the reason why good won is because it was stronger. Not because it was right. You see? In the end, you got to know what was right, not just who's stronger. So evil must admit, and that's what the Malach did. The Malach was a Sultan. He admitted to Jacob, Yaakov, right, that he called him Yisrael, because Sarisa and so on, you fought with, exactly, Amatuchal, and you subdued it, of course, you won. Because he had to admit, and then he sent him on his way. In the end, that's what's going to happen. Evil has to admit. that they were wrong, and then they are terminated. So who knows what's going to be in 2020? It will be fascinating to watch in many ways.
You don't
the
think
end, the end or the dissolution of the Democratic Party. Because what they are doing is unheard of in American history, and is the height of evil, and is the height of the violating and treachery to the Constitution. Now, so that's the first unbelievable thing. Anybody watching American news cannot believe what happens on a daily basis. You see, you can't believe it. Okay, right now it's 2.5 years and we're already what's called inert. We're already, like what else is new, right? Immune, inert, whatever, because of it. But if you really think about it, when it started, you couldn't believe it. That's the first thing. The second thing which is happening, which is incredible, is Iran. Iran is Yishmael. Iran is the evil of Yishmael. You see, even Yishmael I mentioned has a good part. They all want to join with Israel. They're all dying to join with Israel. The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, because they realize, hey, the future's with Israel, not with us. You see, because oil is being pumped out by America and much greater than the Arabs. America doesn't need Arabs anymore, the oil, and so on. They realize the handwriting's on the wall, as they say, right? Who's stopping them? Iran. Iran is the focal point of evil. And what's happening now? America's going to take them out. It's already happening. You see that, right? They shot down that drone, right? Which is ridiculous. I mean, they didn't know the drone was in international waters? No. Iran is desperate to flex its muscle. It's dying economically. So it has to bluff, frighten everybody, right? So everybody will run back with Iran and join them again and say, wait a minute, okay, we'll restore the economy, and so on, It's a bluff. It's trying to frighten the world what it can do. But they picked on the wrong guy, Trump. And remember one thing, Iran is Yishmael, and Iran is the last war. You should know one thing, if Trump takes out Iran, that means he took out the last war before the Mashiach, because I mentioned the Medrash, which says in the Medrash of Yalkut, that Iran will begin a war against Arabia, and Arabia will consult with Edom, which is America. Then Iran will begin to destroy the world, whatever, and then of course the whole world will shake. And of course then God announces through a baskol, divine voice, that this is the Higia Zman Gulaschem, the time of your redemption has arrived, and it's over. You see, and that's what he will, and therefore Iran is the end. You should know. But the amazing thing is that this is not, this is not happening after Mashiach comes. This is happening now, which means that this is a precursor, literally, to the Pekida. It's incredible to watch. There's an unbelievable excitement going on if you realize that the fall of Iran is the beginning of the redemption, based on that medrash. That's the second thing, and it's historical. Never happened before. And the third incredible thing is that Netanyahu failed to put together a coalition. I told you have to watch the Erev Rav. I gave a whole shir about the Erev Rav, which I'm not going to repeat. These are the guys that are Jews, and they're anti-Torah and so on. Anyway, first time in the history of Israel that a prime minister failed to put together a coalition that won the elections. Netanyahu won the elections, right? But without a coalition, there's no government, right? And he failed. First time in history, which is incredible when you think about that. What we're probably watching is the end of Netanyahu as a prime minister, you see, which is interesting. When you think about that, first of all, the fact, like I said, that they got exactly 60 votes, and Feiglin and Bennett failed to come into the threshold. If they would have come in, then there would have been a problem, even with Lieberman, right? Who cares about what Lieberman says? They have a majority. But it was an exact counting that Feiglin's party, right, and Bennett's party failed, and therefore Lieberman is now the kingmaker, you see, and he denied the coalition, which itself is incredible when you think about that, because it doesn't make sense, because they gave everything to Lieberman, what he wanted, he still didn't care. I mean, the reason is obvious why Lieberman did that. One, because he hates Netanyahu, wants to destroy the man. The second reason, because he needs a new constituency, because his constituency, which were the Russians, they're all becoming Israelis. So they don't need Lieberman anymore to represent them. They are Israelis, you see? So what he needs is a new constituency, and the new constituency, of course, is anti-Haredi, those who hate the Jews.
The
That's
left.
why, the left, yeah. That's why he's doing it. Because he has no constituency. Got it? He needs the left, you see, or else he's out, you know? So he's now joining Lapid in that sense, because he's hoping to really become famous, you know, and so on, by anti-Haredi. But you should know, he will suffer a terrible fate, because he used to be, not Haredi, but he used to go around to all the Rabbanim and ask for brachas.
Who?
Lieberman.
Victor Lieberman?
Yeah, they used to have videos of this. And now for him to turn against the Haredim, it's beyond belief. You have any idea what kind of treachery that is? What do you think God's going to do when he looks at him? He's no more of use to God. Because right now he is. He stopped Netanyahu. You see? Now, why did he stop Netanyahu? There are two reasons, right? What's the chokhmah? Because had Netanyahu been able to put together a coalition, then he would have passed a law that he cannot be indicted. But now that he didn't put a coalition, and even if he wins on September 17th, right, he's going to have his hearing about the indictment on October 2nd, you see, which is not enough time anymore, because it takes time. Yeah,
law.
Yeah, to make the law, and therefore if, Mendel indicts him, he's out. And even though he says legally he doesn't have to quit, it's a mistake, because the majority of Israel does not want an indicted prime minister, number one, and he's going to have such pressure, he will have to leave, you see. And then maybe the guy who's going to come in is what's called the transition guy. And he will be able to bring the Jews back, hopefully, to their Torah. Not by force, very important to understand that, not by force, but in some type of a convincing manner where everybody will want to come back to Torah. And that brings me, see, so we have three, what's called unprecedented events. And therefore, that brings me to this, oh wow, which is what we are witnessing is an upheaval. That there are four stages in Geula from another framework. One, there's the tikkun process, which takes time, and mankind is now in many ways under the subjugation of evil, and so on. And there's an enormous amount of apikosis and so on, all the evil ideas and so on, you know. And the world has to be enlightened. You see, it's the concept that the world is dark, ignorant. The second phase is the upheaval and the overthrowing. And this is transformative of evil itself. And that's what the Moshe is doing. With the concept of what's going on in America and Iran and Israel, the Moshe has to remove all the evil. You see, that's the transformation that has to occur. In other words, if you have a disease, it's one thing to have the disease, right? But then you got to stop the disease, right? You got to stop the disease, right? And that's the concept of the transformation phase. And we are witnessing stopping the disease, stopping evil in many different places. You see? The third phase is called rehabilitation. Okay, the guy is sick, he's no more sick, right? The disease has been stopped, which is stage 2. Stage 3, but hey, he's not back anywhere near what he used to be. He's got to be rehabilitated, you see? And that's where the Moshe, and that will be one of the greatest miracles of all. We go in the sense that God has to bring the Jews back to the Torah before the Mashiach comes. Because the Mashiach is not going to come to a nation that is at a zero level. It's called the Matzah Shvela. He's not going to come to a nation that is so low in spirituality that it almost doesn't exist. Remember what I said? It's the moon disappearing. Mashiach does not come to Klal Yisrael when they have disappeared. You see? He's going to come when there's a moilad, and that's called rehabilitation. And that is about to happen. We don't know how, but it's going to be one of the greatest miracles the world will have ever seen. Where the Jewish nation will now be rehabilitated to come back to the Torah. And then what happens is, and not only the Jewish people have to be rehabilitated, but Mashiach ben Yosef himself, as I spoke quite a while ago, he himself needs a rehabilitation where all the impediments against him have to be removed, and he grows. And then you have what's called normative, where the person is now rehabilitated and is now normal, right? That's Mashiach ben David, where he now brings in incredible amount of kedusha and that's the Messianic era. So we are really witnessing, in a certain sense, the disease being terminated. You see, the rehabilitation. We're right in between. I should say we are witnessing the upheaval of evil. You see, and the way we're witnessing is the fight. This is an incredible fight. You think evil wants to go down? Of course not. That's Kriya Samsov. Where evil said, hey, we're finished, but we're not going under. And they resurged to attack the Jewish people again. And then God destroyed them. You see? So evil fights, and now it's really trying to fight. They're trying to destroy Trump as part of that concept. Iran is resurging, trying to resurge again, right? By blowing up different ships. Because that's Yishmael, the evil of Yishmael. And it's amazing what Netanyahu did, because what he did, you should know, is a terrible evil. You know why? Because what he should have done is he said, hey, I can't put the coalition together, right? Okay, so Rivlin will appoint somebody else to do a coalition. You see? Or whoever that would have been. Hopefully it would have been Gideon Sa'ar, and so on, right? But Netanyahu said, no way anybody else is going to have a chance. Because it's possible if Gideon Sa'ar would have been chosen, Liebman doesn't hate Gideon Sa'ar, you see, so it's possible that he would have relented. He said, okay, you see, but Netanyahu will not give up the kingship, you see. So what he did is he called new elections, which is millions and millions of shekel. Do you have any idea the whole country is now thrown into elections again, you see, which is tens of millions of shekel. For what? Because of his ego, because he wouldn't allow anybody else to rule, right? Because he knew Rivlin is going to appoint somebody else. So therefore he threw the whole country into chaos with another crazy election for the next 3 months. You have any idea what goes on? And now they're all out there again trying to get the voters again, and they're all trying to put each other down. It's another 3-ring circus. You see, with the same vindictive behavior and lashon hara that each one is saying about everybody else. And besides that, it costs millions of dollars. I don't know how many, 100 million shekel?
$40 million.
Wow. That's an election be like.
Oh yeah, sure,
A lot of money.
Why? Because of Netanyahu's ego. Is he out of his mind? How do you do something like that? Because he's more concerned with himself than of course, it's not covet, it's power. Covet is one thing. Okay, I'm honored, but that's not where it's at. It's power, that's where it's at, right? Because he wants to be the king, right? So he threw the entire Israeli population, right, into a chaos. And now everybody's slandering each other, and it's going to cost them, I don't know, 40, 50 million shekel or dollars, whatever it is, right? The whole country's in chaos now because of this. They can't believe what's going on. You see? All he had to do was say, listen, I can't put a coalition together, I'm out. So what he did is he dissolved the government exactly to prevent that, you see. But that is an incredible evil.
So right now, who's ruling the country?
The old coalition. No, he's the caretaker government.
Uh-huh.
You have to have somebody. No.
By default.
Yeah. Well, yeah, what that's called even here, if you win in November, you still have the original government till January, right? Mm-hmm. Same idea. You can't dissolve the government, and it's real chaos, you know.
So
but anyway,
at the end of the day, he's ruling for the amount of time.
That's
till September.
Till September, yeah.
So he has something.
Well, that's part of the cheshbon. The real cheshbon is, oh no, even if I can't put, it's what's called Thomas Nafshi and Pelishtim.
Right.
You know, when Shimshon died, right? He said, okay, I'm about to go, you know, but let everybody die with me. I'm going to die with everybody else, right?
But if he's indicted at the end, he's going to go down in disgrace.
Yes, he will. Yeah. He will go down in disgrace.
If he left now, he might save face.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I didn't put the coalition. Liebman did it. He got me, you know.
Right.
And that's it. But he still walks away with all the accolades of triumph, you know. He did. I mean, in the end, he was an incredible prime minister, not from a Torah standpoint, but from a well, even that I'm not sure about, because the economy is, you know, whatever. Even though there's a rise, but there's a tremendous amount of poverty. There's 2 million kids. I don't know if you know that, below the poverty level. They just came out with that statistic a couple of 2 million below the poverty level. I mean, you believe this in a country, and not only that. I mean, you take out the apartment prices, and the cost of living is insane. I don't know if I give him any credit for that, but certainly in terms of security, and even security, I won't give him credit, because Jews are dying left and right at the hands of Hamas. Where is this? Yeah, where is this guy? Where are you? Excuse me. They pushed the red button a long time ago. But in any case, at least in a certain ways, he was a very good prime minister. There's no question about that, and so on and so forth. So he'd go out with some type of honor. Now he's going to go out with disgrace. But anyway, look, the Rosh has his cheshbonis and so on. But anyway, this is just, what I'm trying to point out is this is all historical. This never happened before. You see? So you're looking at three different events that are historical. Trump and his successors and his incredible opposition. You look at the beginning of the destruction of Iran, and who knows, maybe it means that Trump will go to war with Iran, destroy the mullahs, right? And new elections, and they're now going to have a normal society in Iran, which is the fall of terrorism, you should know. That's the end of Hezbollah, that is the end of Hamas, that is the end of all of these guys, because there's no money and there's no support from Iran. It's over with. I mean, there'll always be loners and so on, but the what's called the moral fiber of evil, of terrorism, is gone. That's one of the greatest things. That's why Trump should destroy Iran. Forget about economy and oil. Excuse me, if I met with Trump, what I would say to him is the following. I said, what are you talking about? Do you know how much evil Iran does on a daily basis? Do you have any idea how much suffering, agony, anguish, and pain is caused by Iran to millions of people? Take them out just for that. Forget about they have the nuclear weapon and so on. These are the most evil people on earth. Not take out Iran, take out the mullahs. Forget about if they're building a nuclear weapon or not. Do the world a favor. How much suffering is caused because of this one nation. You see? That's what I would tell him. Hey, maybe he'll listen, who knows. In any case, because Iran deserved, not Iran as people, but the Iranian government, the mullahs, deserve to be destroyed. Of course. Look how much suffering they do. How many people have died because of them, and so on. Just like Trump is taking out ISIS, he's got to take out Iran too. It's a moral obligation to destroy evil. And if you can do it, well, of course America can. And now he's got a beautiful pretext, the drone. He's not using it. Anyway, mistake that Trump is making. But anyway, okay, that's between him and God. But the main idea is that we are witnessing three things. All part of the Messianic process. And like I said, is all part of the evil forces and so on. And this is basically...
You didn't address Gog and Magog.
I once did. Yeah, Gog and Magog. Well, Gog and Magog is fundamentally, I believe, the UN. Because they are exactly all the 70 nations that are against Israel. They have a double standard. And that's Gog and Magog, and so on. I don't believe there's a real nation. Gog and Magog is Gematria Shivan, by the way, 70, and so on, And they actually fulfill the whole concept of Gog from the land of Magog. What's that? To try to take away Jerusalem from Israel, which they've tried to do, and so on, So I believe Gog and Magog is really the United Nations. But look what's happened. So therefore, if Gog and Magog is fulfilled, if the Iranian war is fulfilled, what's left? Right? Then the upheaval, hopefully the dissolution of the Democratic Party and the media. Anyway, nobody goes to the media. They're all losing subscribers and all that, and so on, Then, and the Erev Rav. The main thing is the Erev Rav. Get rid of the Erev Rav, And the Klal Yisrael, willingly will want to do tshuva, and that will be one of the greatest nisim of all time. The rehabilitation of the Jewish people back into a nation that are scholars, Torah scholars, and worship God. Then Mashiach ben Yosef comes where he himself is rehabilitated. That's the incredible thing, and that begins the entire redemption.
So he won't have to fight
now.
Mashiach ben Yosef won't have to fight if Trump does. If he knocks out Iran, so then Mashiach ben Yosef won't have to fight. He won't have to fight Iran. Mashiach ben Yosef.
No, he won't have to fight Iran.
Trump will do the job for him.
Yeah.
So he'll be able to live.
He will be able to live, yes.
He's living anyway, you said.
Living anyway, yeah.
No, but we're davening all the time that he shouldn't die.
Yes.
He
doesn't die, because I once said, the Vilna Gaon says the remez, because Yaakov Avinu said, Oisef b'ni Chai. Yeah, that's the remez, that he won't die. The Rosham does not want him to die, because he gave him a kapora by bringing him back in many incarnations, and he suffered, but in the last incarnation, he will be okay.